I always thought the dumbest thing a person could do was poke a sleeping bear. Turns out, the dumbest thing is welding a gate shut on a civil engineer's inherited land and leaving behind a laminated HOA violation like it's a breakup note on the windshield. They welded my gate shut at 3 o'clock in the morning. No warning, no conversation, just a steel plate, a set of bolts, and a laminated HOA violation swinging in the breeze like it owned the place. That was my welcome home. Not a pie, not a neighborly wave, just a metal blockade and a notice printed on premium cardstock telling me I was in violation of community guidelines. Funny thing is, I didn't live in their community. My ranch isn't part of their HOA. Never was, never will be. But when petty power meets open land, someone always gets stupid. And this time they welded their stupidity to my front gate. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're tuning in from. If you're into wild stories that sound too real to be made up, packed with twists, justice, and just enough HOA absurdity to make your blood pressure twitch, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story, even crazier, and the surprise we've got lined up next? Yeah, you're gonna want to be here for that. My name's Clayton Ridge, civil infrastructure consultant, retired early. Specializes in easements, public access, and calling bees in 3 counties. A few months ago, I inherited my grandfather's 35-acre ranch just outside Pinemont Estates. The kind of upscale subdivision where the fences are decorative, but the control is real. Grandpa's land predates the development by 50 years, but that didn't stop them from pretending they owned it. They sent me a notice claiming my property had been rezoned into their HOA jurisdiction, which would have been cute if it wasn't forged. I'd barely stepped foot on the dirt before they decided to pick a fight with a guy who used to write the codes they were faking. I called the number on the notice, got transferred to Darla Keys, president of the HOA and apparently queen of delusion. She talked like sweet tea over a razor blade, said the transition had been approved, that my rustic fencing violated 6 standards, and that my contractors would now need to pay for permits $500.00 each. 3-week approval time. I told her I'd need documentation. She promised an email. What she didn't promise was to unbolt my damn gate, so I grabbed my truck, my bolt cutters, and my blood pressure meds and got to work. Took me nearly an hour to slice through what they thought was permanent. Someone in a white SUV watched the whole thing from the development entrance, then drove off when I got the gate open. Smart. If you're gonna mess with a ridge, you better have an exit plan. Later that day, I met Martha Quill, retired paralegal, sharp as barbed wire, used to be close with my grandfather. She showed up just as the contractors did, introduced herself like a neighbor, and then immediately told me I was in a hornet's nest. According to her, Darla's been trying to annex this land for years. She's got the board wrapped around her perfectly manicured finger, and she's been laying the groundwork for a second entrance, one that would cut right through my property. Turns out, the HOA's been using a logging road that borders my land without permission. Grandpa had denied easement rights more than once, but they kept sneaking trucks through. That day, I didn't just find a welded gate. I found a war that had been brewing long before I arrived. And now I was the one holding the match. Back at the ranch, I dug into Grandpa's old records. Found everything. Survey maps, signed exclusions, and a folder labeled just in case. Inside, dated photos of landscaping trucks trespassing, copies of rejected access requests, and a notarized letter from the original county agreement clearly stating that our land was not and could not be subject to Pinemont HOA jurisdiction. They thought they were playing chess, but they forgot something important. My grandfather never played games, and neither do I. The next morning, I got an email from the HOA with 2 attachments. One was a scanned, updated community map showing my land inside their boundary, complete with pastel shading like they'd annexed it with a Crayola. The second, a permit application. $500, non-refundable, for temporary work access. Let that sink in. They welded my gate shut, trespassed, and now they wanted me to pay them to get onto my own property. That's not policy, that's ransom with a font choice. I stared at the email like it might blink first. Spoiler alert, it didn't. That was the moment I stopped seeing this as a misunderstanding and started seeing it as a hostile acquisition attempt dressed up in homeowner smiles. The part that made it truly absurd? They thought I wouldn't fight back. They thought I'd fold like a lawn chair in hurricane season. But I've spent my entire career decoding legal mazes for a living. They didn't just poke the bear, they gave it a lawyer. I didn't have to look far for backup. Martha Quill showed up that afternoon like clockwork, carrying a binder the size of a Thanksgiving turkey and a face that said she was done playing nice. She handed me a copy of the HOA bylaws with post-it notes sticking out like warning flags. Your grandfather never trusted Darla Keys, she told me, but he respected the old board. Back when they still had elections and not coronations, turns out Darla wasn't always queen of the cul-de-sac. She'd wormed her way up the ladder after the previous president moved out and no one stepped up to run. That's how it starts. A bake sale, a committee chair. Next thing you know, she's rewriting zoning maps, with a glass of rosé in one hand and a rubber stamp board in the other. I asked Martha how she knew all this. She just tapped her temple and said, "Because I never stopped listening. And I keep everything." That's when she dropped the real bomb. Darla had been quietly pushing plans to build a second entrance to the development, right through the southern edge of my land. It wasn't just about a shortcut. That edge of the ranch sits higher than anything in Pinemont, overlooks the entire valley, and according to Martha, there are natural springs under it. Darla had already floated the idea to a couple developers, casually, off the record, under the table. It was a land grab with landscaping. I felt my jaw tighten as she spoke, not because I was surprised, but because it was working. She'd started small, forged notices, whispers, and now she was escalating. They weren't expanding, they were engulfing. She was using HOA regulations like a wrecking ball wrapped in ribbon. And the more Martha talked, the more I realized I wasn't the only one they'd tried this on, but I might be the first with the tools to actually stop it. That night, I went into Grandpa's old office, cleared off the dust and started digging. He was many things: stoic, stubborn, obsessed with documentation. The man kept every scrap of paper like it owed him money. It took hours, but eventually I found a slim, manila folder tucked inside a marked-up county map, written in his tight, all-caps handwriting, "If they ever try this." Inside, gold, copies of the original development agreements, property surveys with official stamps, a notarized exclusion letter signed by 3 county commissioners, a rejection from the planning board denying the HOA's request to absorb his land from 10 years ago, even photos. Time-tacked, labeled, archived, of landscaping trucks sneaking through that back road like kids skipping school. It wasn't just evidence. It was a paper fortress. Grandpa hadn't just anticipated this, he'd prepared for it. He didn't believe in revenge, but he definitely believed in leverage. I sat there in the quiet, surrounded by a man's legacy disguised as paperwork, and thought, this was never about fences. It was about the line between right and wrong, drawn in ink, not asphalt. Darla was moving fences. I was holding the deed, and now I had the tools, the proof, and the rage to respond. But I wasn't going to scream. I was going to plan. Because justice, real justice, the kind that lasts, doesn't arrive in a tent. It arrives with signatures, dates, and a second copy for the court. They wanted to play legal? Great. I'd show them what legal actually looks like. What they didn't know? I hadn't even opened the second folder labeled Escalation. And trust me, when I do, it's not just going to shake Darla's HOA fantasy. It's going to tear up the whole map. Stay close. You'll want to see what happens when the back road they've been abusing becomes the front line of my plan. Before we get to what I did with that back road, and trust me, it was legendary, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss how this little easement turned into a $750 0-cent per truck toll booth and a front row seat to HOA meltdown. And if you've ever dealt with a nosy neighbor or a power-hungry board, drop a comment below, because the next chapter, let's just say, the toll booth was only the beginning. I wasn't looking for it. I was just walking the southern edge of the ranch, checking out the slope where Grandpa used to keep beehives, when I noticed the tracks. Deep ones, fresh ones, dual-tread tires, wide spacing, landscaping trucks, no doubt. The same ones I'd seen coasting through Pinemont, hauling overpriced sod and ornamental rock. These tracks didn't belong to me. They curved right along the fence line, then dipped out of sight behind a row of half-dead scrub oak. Curiosity may have killed the cat, but I'm not the cat. I'm the guy who makes sure the cat's trespassing fine is enforceable in court. I followed the trail and ended up standing on what used to be an old logging road, half overgrown but still solid enough to support a convoy. I stood there for a while watching a hawk circle overhead and thought, "Well, Dorla, I just found your secret entrance." Back in Grandpa's office, I dove into the files. I wasn't even through the first layer of manila folders before I found what I was hoping for: proof. Photos. Dozens of them. Every angle, every truck, every timestamp. Grandpa had labeled them with his usual sharp wit. Same blue truck, third offense. HOA thinks I'm blind or brain dead. Mixed in were copies of letters he'd sent, real ones, registered, mail, to the HOA stating in no uncertain terms that they were not authorized to use the road. No agreement, no permission, no easement. What struck me was how calm he stayed in writing even when they ignored him. I guess that's the difference between experience and anger. He didn't fight with noise, he fought with paper. And now I was holding the receipts. But then I found something I didn't expect, something that turned this from satisfying into strategic. According to the boundary maps, that road wasn't even on our property. It was on a sliver of land, 5 acres, owned by a company called Ridgeline Timber Holdings. Sounded imposing. Wasn't. Quick search showed they'd gone dormant a few years back, after shutting down operations in the region. The land was still listed under their name but had been marked for asset liquidation. I made a few calls, got bounced around, and eventually reached a lawyer in Phoenix who confirmed what I suspected. They were open to selling and fast. Cash buyer, full price, no financing? I could hear him smiling through the phone. He emailed the agreement that afternoon. $800,000 for the land, including that little road they'd been abusing for years. It was steep, but so is freedom, and besides, I didn't buy a road. I bought control. By nightfall, I owned the only back door into Pinemont that could handle their heavy-duty landscaping delivery, the real estate equivalent of closing their escape hatch and putting a keypad on it. They'd built their castle on my back porch and didn't think I'd check the blueprint. That's the problem with arrogance. It doesn't read fine print. While they were busy measuring me for a compliance violation, I was drafting a toll schedule. I wasn't angry anymore. I was amused. There's a special kind of satisfaction in watching a bully walk into a trap they dug for you. They thought I'd disappear into red tape. Instead, I showed up with title rights and a payment portal. The next morning, Martha called. She didn't bother with pleasantries. They've got a $75,000 delivery set for tomorrow. Sod, stone, the works. Trucks are scheduled to roll in through the back at 10 a.m. She paused. You ready? I looked down at the new deed, freshly notarized. Oh, I'm ready, I said. They're about to find out just how expensive bad assumptions can get. I spent the next few hours prepping signage, simple stuff. Public property trespassing prohibited, access by permission only. I installed trail cameras, printed QR codes linking to a mobile toll payment page, and built a temporary gate with a locking mechanism sturdy enough to stop an SUV, but just polite enough not to be called a barricade. This wasn't vengeance. It was policy. I didn't want to keep them out. I wanted them to knock. With a credit card. The toll, $750, 0 cents per vehicle, payable on arrival. Commercial use fee, nothing outrageous. In fact, it was a bargain compared to what they'd pay if I filed trespassing charges. I called it the Neighborhood Access Clarification System. Has a nice ring to it, don't you think? I also set up a solar camera to live stream the gate, just in case they tried to pull something creative, and by creative I mean stupid. By 9 the next morning, everything was ready. I had coffee in one hand, a lawn chair in the other, and a legal property deed in my back pocket. I didn't have to wait long. At 10:17 IMM, the convoy appeared. 5 trucks, 2 flatbeds, and 1 black SUV leading the pack, with the Pinemont crest on the side. Fancy script, leaf logo, the whole suburban monarch vibe. The trucks rolled up slow, saw the gate, and stopped. The SUV window rolled down, and there she was, Darla Keyes, looking like someone just told her the brunch buffet was canceled. Her expression went from confused to furious in under 3 seconds. I sipped my coffee and stood up. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. She stepped out of the SUV like she thought it still meant something. "Mr. Ridge," she called. "What is this?" I smiled. "This is private property. You're standing on Ridgeline Access Road, which I now own." I pointed to the signage. "Access is available for $750, 0 cents per vehicle. Payment required prior to entry." She laughed. "You're joking." "Nope," I said. "You've been using this road illegally for years. I have the photos, the records, and now the deed." Her face contorted like someone had handed her a glass of vinegar and told her it was rose. "You can't be serious." "I'm a civil engineer," I said. "I'm always serious about access." She tried arguing, negotiating, even threatening. Told me I was obstructing essential services. I told her the only thing I was obstructing was their habit of freeloading. Then she threatened to call the sheriff. I encouraged it. I'm sure he'd love to see the deed and the payment terms. The truck drivers behind her were getting restless. One leaned out and asked, "Do we pay here or are we turning around?" I handed Darla a flyer with the QR code and watched her expression crack. She knew she'd lost. But she paid. All of them did. One by one, $750, 0 cents each. I opened the gate like a man hosting a party he didn't want but planned perfectly. As the last truck passed through, I smiled and walked back to my chair. It wasn't about the money, it was about the line, the one they crossed, and the one I redrew in concrete. They'd tried to trap me with fake maps and HOA fiction. I responded with deeds and daylight. They came for my land, I sold them access to their own mistake. And tomorrow I turned the gate into a permanent, automated toll booth. Solar-powered, camera-monitored, receipt-printed, because if they want to keep pretending I'm the problem, I'm happy to keep charging them for the privilege. So stick around, because the next part, that's when Darla calls the sheriff, and it doesn't go the way she thinks. You'll want to see what happens when the law meets the deed, one angry HOA president at a time. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, because trust me, this chess match is just getting interesting. I built the toll booth in a single day, and I have to admit, it looked cleaner than most government offices I'd worked with. Solar-powered, QR-coded, motion sensors, security camera with livestream backup, and a laminated sign that read, "Commercial access, $750, 0 cents. Residential curiosity, free, but recorded." They say revenge is best served cold, but I prefer it solar-charged and itemized. The gate mechanism was basic but satisfying. You pay, it opens. You don't, it doesn't. HOA logic, really. Except this time the gate was mine, and the paperwork actually meant something. That morning I put on a clean flannel, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and waited for the first entitled engine hum to break the silence. Sure enough, right on schedule, Darla rolled up with another batch of landscaping trucks like it was just another day on the Empire's dime. But this time, the drawbridge came with a bill. She stepped out of the SUV like she was about to address the nation, hands on hips, HOA badge clipped to her fleece like it came with jurisdiction. "Mr. Ridge, this has gone far enough. You are obstructing vital community operations." I stayed seated and pointed at the QR code sign. "No obstruction here, just a payment portal. You're welcome to use the road after you cover the cost of years of unauthorized use." She was already dialing. "This is extortion," she snapped. "Actually," I replied, "this is advanced HOA math. Fee times usage equals invoice." She glared at me like I'd just insulted her lawn ornaments. "I'm calling the sheriff." "Excellent," I said. "We can show him both our documents and maybe he'll enjoy the security footage too." And with that, we both waited for law enforcement to come explain what civics class clearly hadn't. Deputy Sheriff Hawkins arrived 20 minutes later, looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. He took one look at Darla, then at me, then at the toll booth, and sighed like it was his third HOA call this month. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked, clipboard in hand. Darla went first, naturally, unleashing a dramatic retelling of how her community had been blocked, harassed, and held hostage by a gate. I waited patiently, sipping my coffee like it was popcorn. Then I handed him a copy of the deed, photos of the trespassing trucks, copies of Grandpa's letters, the signed bill of sale for the road, and the laminated price list. Hawkins didn't say much. He just scanned, squinted, and then slowly turned to Darla with the expression of a man realizing he'd just walked into a soap opera. "Well," he said, flipping through the papers, "looks like Mr. Ridge owns this access point fair and square. If you've been using it without written permission, that's trespassing. If he's charging access fees, and it's his land, that's within his rights." Darla looked like someone had slapped her with a rolled-up HOA newsletter. "But we've used this road for years." "And he has photos of every one of those years," Hawkins replied. "If you want to contest the access issue, you'll need to take it up in civil court. But today you either pay the toll or turn around." That was the moment her shoulders slumped. Just a little. Not a defeat, but a dent. The kind that spreads. The trucks behind her began to honk, politely at first, then with the growing tempo of annoyed subcontractors losing billable hours, one of them leaned out the window and asked, "We paying or what?" Darla turned slowly, as if every muscle in her face was reconsidering its life choices. Then, without a word, she handed me a credit card. "Just so you know," she said, barely above a whisper, "this isn't over." "Oh, I know," I replied, swiping the card through my reader. "It's just finally being documented properly. Each truck rolled through one by one, scanned, charged, recorded. They'd used that road like a free vending machine for years. Now it had a coin slot. The irony wasn't lost on me, or, apparently, the residents watching from behind their vinyl fences. Because the real shockwave didn't come from the toll. It came from the newsletter that went out later that week. Due to increased operational costs, the HOA announced landscaping assessments would rise by 12% this quarter. And just like that, cracks began to form. Residents who'd been passively sipping their sweet tea started asking questions. Why were they paying more? Why hadn't the board disclosed the access issue earlier? One guy on the next block, a retired CPA named Marvin, started attending board meetings just to ask if that neighbor with the gate was really the villain here, or just the only one reading contracts. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. They accused me of extortion. But I was just charging what the HOA would have charged me had the tables been turned. They brought a HOA to a property law fight. I brought deeds, cameras, and receipts. But here's the thing about cracks. Once they start, they spread fast. Darla's glossy leadership started losing its shine. The whispers grew louder, not just about the gate, but about landscaping contracts, rising dues, and her sister's company getting all the maintenance bids. The same residents who once avoided eye contact now gave me polite nods. One even dropped off a pie with a sticky note that read, "Not all fences are bad." The power structure she'd built wasn't crumbling yet, but the termites were organizing, and the next move she made would either patch the hole or blow it wide open. Stick around, because her next play, it's not just desperate, it's dumb. You'll want to see what happens when a bad bluff meets a public audit. Hit that subscribe button now, because the HOA meltdown has just begun. So now the gate's up, the fees are rolling in, and Darla just got her first public dose of accountability. But trust me, she's not taking it quietly. You think calling the sheriff was bold? Wait until you see her next move. Let's just say, when desperation meets politics, things get real messy real fast. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the fireworks in the next chapter. And if your HOA's ever tried pulling a fast one, drop a comment below. We might just feature your story next. If a picture's worth 1,000 words, then a 30-foot electronic billboard cycling financial records on a loop is worth about 10 HOA resignations. I installed it right at the edge of my property, perfectly angled to face Pinemont's clubhouse and pool deck. Solar-powered, Wi-Fi-enabled, high-resolution display. It lit up like divine judgment at sundown. The The first image? A scanned copy of Darla's signature approving a $27,000 0-cents beautification contract awarded to her sister's landscaping firm with no competing bids. Next slide. Permit applications flagged with emergency exemptions sidestepping public notice. Then came the real crowd pleaser, side-by-side HOA budgets showing skyrocketing dues and mysteriously missing reserve fund allocations. No narration, no commentary, just cold, brutal facts glowing over evening yoga and community bingo. Darla wanted control. I gave her visibility. The reaction was immediate. I'd barely made it back to my porch when Martha called, laughing so hard she couldn't catch her breath. "You turned your property line into Times Square," she wheezed. "Darla nearly choked on her protein bar." I told her this wasn't revenge. It was just transparency, supersized. "Nothing scares a tyrant more than receipts on a billboard," I said, especially when the font's large enough for the whole neighborhood to read. The next day, HOA residents began gathering near the clubhouse, squinting at the slides, snapping photos, whispering like kids reading the answers off someone else's test, and for the first time, they weren't whispering about me, they were whispering about her. I could have stopped there. But Darla didn't stop when they welded my gate shut. So I added a few features along our shared property line: motion-activated sprinklers set to accidental range, solar floodlights that flipped on anytime movement was detected after 10 p.m., and my personal favorite, a weather station with a wind speed sensor that whirred like a small jet engine every time a breeze rolled through. Technically legal, functionally annoying. The HOA filed a formal complaint about hostile landscaping. I responded with footage of HOA board members cutting through my property at midnight, plus a time-stamped invoice they still hadn't paid. They called me hostile. I gave them hospitality, with Wi-Fi and timestamps. That week, I started getting knock-knock visits, not from the board, but from residents. First was Marvin, the retired CPA. He stood on my porch with a printout of the HOA's last quarterly financial statement and said, "Is it just me, or are we paying for the same park benches 3 times?" Then came Cheryl, who ran the neighborhood gardening club and had just learned her budget had been slashed so Darla's pool committee could install aesthetic lighting. One by one they came, neighbors who'd never made eye contact at the mailbox now standing in my driveway, asking real questions. Turns out, truth spreads faster than fear when it's got receipts to go with it. That's when Elliot Raines, a retired federal judge who'd lived quietly near the east entrance, stepped forward and asked the best question yet. "Do you have a copy of the HOA's development charter?" I did. Grandpa had kept everything. Elliot read through it, legal eye sharp as ever. He pointed out 4 violations in under 15 minutes. "If half of this is true," he said, "this isn't just mismanagement. This is civil fraud." And just like that, we had a quorum. Marvin, Cheryl, Elliot, me. Martha, of course. We started calling ourselves the Truth Committee. Half joking at first, but it stuck. We met every Thursday at my place, armed with lawn chairs, iced tea, and a printer that barely kept up. Every meeting ended with more evidence, more questions, more clarity. And what had started as a land dispute turned into a community awakening. But Darla wasn't blind. She could feel it slipping. You don't run a neighborhood like a monarchy for 4 years without knowing when the pitchforks are sharpening. She doubled down, sent out newsletters painting me as a disruptive external actor, warned residents of unauthorized surveillance, conveniently omitting the part where the cameras caught her brother-in-law trying to jimmy my toll gate at 2 a.m., But it was too late. The momentum had shifted. People weren't afraid anymore. They were curious. And that's a problem for anyone hiding behind bylaws and birthday cake diplomacy. Stick around, because Darla's next move? It's not a counterattack, it's a confession in disguise. Hit that subscribe button now. You're going to want a front row seat when this castle finally cracks. It all came full circle at 2:38 a.m., caught on 4 angles of night vision camera, complete with audio. There was Darla, clipboard in hand like it gave her diplomatic immunity, directing her brother-in-law and 2 others as they cut through my gate with power tools. You could hear her say it plain as daylight, "Let's see how he likes having no gate at all." By sunrise, I was sitting in the sheriff's office, coffee in one hand, flash drive in the other. The deputy didn't even try to hide his wince when the footage played. By noon, the state police were involved. By 2 o'clock, Darla, her brother-in-law, and 2 HOA board members were being led from their homes in matching silver bracelets. I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I just stood there on my porch watching the patrol cars roll by, thinking how long it took for the truth to get traction. But once it did, it didn't stop for anything. The search warrants turned up everything: falsified water reports, double-billed landscaping invoices, payments to shell companies tied to her son, and emails to county staff pushing emergency access designations with fabricated signatures. But the part that really got the regulators' attention: improper storage and disposal of landscaping chemicals just 100 yards uphill from the real community water supply. I always knew they were messy, but I didn't expect them to be toxic, literally. The state attorney general launched an official probe. Environmental inspectors roped off entire parts of Pinemont. And Commissioner Hale, the one who signed those forged zoning letters, resigned with a press release so vague it could have doubled as a fortune cookie. The system that protected her had finally shifted. Turns out, the only thing more dangerous than a woman with too much HOA power is a man with a folder full of dated documents and Wi-Fi. The new HOA board didn't waste time. Darla and her crew were barred from ever holding office again by court order. An audit team went line by line through 4 years of records. When the dust settled, over $312,000, 0 cents, had either disappeared or been funneled into personal side projects. Some of it was recoverable, most of it wasn't. So I did something unexpected. I donated every dollar from my toll booth fees, over $63,000, 0 cents, to establish what we called the Neighborhood Integrity Fund. Its job? To reimburse residents hit with unfair fines, repair common areas that had been neglected, and provide free legal reviews for homeowners battling overreach. I didn't do it for forgiveness. I did it because Grandpa would have. Because this was never just about gates or roads. It was about fixing what happens when people stop paying attention. 2 weeks later, something happened that hit harder than any invoice or headline. A group of residents, some of them folks who'd once crossed the street to avoid looking at me, showed up with gloves, lumber, and a few buckets of paint. They rebuilt the gate, quietly, carefully, piece by piece. One guy, middle-aged, new to the neighborhood, looked at me and said, "It's not just about the gate, is it?" I shook my head. "Nope, but it's a good place to start." It wasn't perfect carpentry. Some of the lines were crooked, one panel hung a little loose, but to me it looked better than anything a contractor could have done, because they didn't come to fix wood. They came to fix trust. Some fences mark boundaries. Others mark beginnings. The toll booth? I didn't tear it down. I turned it into a flower planter, put sunflowers in it, installed a small sign that reads, "In memory of unauthorized access." Every now and then someone walks by and smiles. Sometimes they shake their head. A few even drop off a plant or a note. What was once a legal barrier had become a neighborhood joke, and a strange kind of landmark. Legacy doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it just needs a little soil, a little water, and the patience to let things grow where something ugly used to stand. My grandfather would have liked that. He believed in property lines, but he also believed in people, even when they forgot how to believe in themselves. On the 1-year anniversary of the incident, we hosted a community BBQ under the rebuilt gate. We left it open the whole day. No permits, no violations, just food, stories, and a little laughter. Kids played in the field. Retired folks swapped recipes. Someone brought a sheet cake that read, "To boundaries and the neighbors who respect them." We toasted with sweet tea and sparkling cider. Russell, the new board president, raised his cup and said, "They broke the gate. We built a community." I didn't say much, just nodded and passed the potato salad. Not every victory needs a speech. Sometimes the best revenge isn't justice. It's planting peace where they tried to pour concrete. It's letting a toll booth bloom. It's replacing fences with friendships, one awkward apology and one shared rake at a time. Pinemont still has problems. Every community does. But now they've got awareness, structure, and a few stubborn folks who remember what happens when nobody's watching. As for me, I still walk that road every morning, still check the sensors, still read the notes left in the planter box. But more often than not, I just sit on the porch, sip my coffee, and smile. Not because I won, but because the next time someone tries to redraw the line, I know this neighborhood will stand on the right side of it. And just like that, what started with a welded gate turned into something no one, least of all me, expected. Not just a legal win or a personal stand, but a turning point for an entire neighborhood, a place that had been quietly cracking under the weight of control, now rebuilding together. I didn't need to prove I was right. I just needed to remind them what right looked like. And I think that's what Grandpa wanted all along. Not a war, but a wake-up call. Not revenge, but restoration. He left me land, yes, but more importantly, he left me a blueprint. And I hope, in the end, we followed it well. Because here's the real lesson. What looks like a fence might actually be a mirror. It reflects how we treat each other. Do we lock people out, or do we make space for boundaries and belonging? Justice doesn't always come in a courtroom. Sometimes it shows up in neighbors planting flowers in a toll booth. Sometimes it's just a folded lawn chair, a quiet evening, and knowing you stood your ground without losing your decency. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been the underdog, the overlooked, the one told to just accept it, then I hope you walk away feeling seen, maybe even a little more powerful, because the truth is, you don't have to shout to be heard. You don't need to fight dirty to win clean. You just need facts, a spine, and sometimes a really good set of cameras. So do me a favor, if this story hit home, drop a comment below. Share your HO war stories, your neighborhood redemption arcs, or just tell me where you're watching from. Like this episode, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we've got more wild, true-feeling stories coming your way, and trust me, the next one might just be crazier than a toll booth in a cul-de-sac. Thanks for being here. I'm Clayton Ridge, and this was just the beginning.